Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Velero community meeting / open discussion. Per usual, we have a bunch of things to go through, and I'm going to link the agenda in the chat here. So if you want to add anything to the agenda, please do so in the discussion topics. We have a bunch of discussion topics, so we'll try to get to those as quickly as possible today. We do have a few carryovers from last week as well. To start off with, though, we want to introduce a new team member to the Velero team. Stephanie Baumann will be joining the Velero team as the new PM. Welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the intro, Jonas.
You want to tell everyone a little about yourself?
Sure. So I am joining the Velero team from previously being with VMware for a year on the Win10 end user computing team. Prior to that, I worked a little bit with AWS and a bit with Dell, and I'm very much looking forward to working with the Velero team.
Awesome. Super happy to have you here. Welcome. And yeah, this is going to be a fun ride. You'll be added to the website later today as well with your name and picture.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Let's move on to the next set of status updates, and I'll be sharing my screen for the rest of the time here. So first off, we have Nolan.
Yeah, so last week we had talked a little bit in our discussion about the file format for the backup and versioning that. So I got a PR put in, and we've got a description now of when we will bump the version. Right now, that's mainly for Rafael Brito's current PR with adding all versions of resources into the PR or into the backup. Realizing now I probably should have incremented that for the next item I have. But this kind of outlines the rules that we should follow for incrementing the file format version on Velero. The main thing is I'm going to try to follow semantic versioning, where if we add new directories or files, we will increment the minor and patch versions. If we move stuff around such that it is not restorable by previous versions of Velero, we will increment that with a major version of Velero, and it will be a major version of the file format. But just because we increment a major version of Velero doesn't necessarily mean that the file format's changing the version. So that's kind of the quick version of that. So that for the next one, I finished up the PR 2323 on Velero Master. If you have the CSI feature flag turned on, it will now upload, and you have the CSI snapshot plugin installed. The CSI snapshot objects will not only be captured in the backup tarball, but they will also be captured as gzip JSON, very similar to the Velero native snapshots. And they'll be uploaded next to the gzip tarball. And that is a building block for the next PR, which is a early draft of including the volume snapshot info in Velero backup describe -- details. This is really early work, so it doesn't actually do anything yet, but it's going to start pulling information down from the object storage. So Velero backup describe -- details will be able to do Velero native snapshots, Rustic Pod volume backups, and CSI volume backups once this is merged. And then let's see, the next thing, I'll have more to say about this further into discussion topics, but I got to start looking into the issues with CRDs. There were a few issues, 2383 being one of them, where CRDs were reporting errors about fields being duplicated. They would say something like all the versions had the same field, in this particular case, additional printer columns. They were all the same version, all the same value, and you should put them in the top level instead. After doing a bunch of research yesterday, it turns out this was a result of the fix that we did in 1.30. Did some more research, and that fix was not enough. So this is a Velero-induced problem, and I've got some suggestions for remedies down in discussion time, but since that's a more involved topic, I'm going to defer that for later. And then next week, oh, Jonas, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, so next week, Nolan will be on Brett Fisher's show talking about Velero. So Brett Fisher is a well-renowned teacher on container technologies, Docker especially, and moving into Kubernetes, and has been running a live show for quite some time, interviewing people about interesting projects, products, and now we're moving on to Nolan talking about Velero. So yeah, this is happening on Thursday next week. I believe it is at 1 p.m. Eastern. I'll make sure to update the notes here with when the link goes live as well, so we can have that there. And then, of course, we'll add this to the YouTube channel that we have. So thank you so much, Nolan, for stepping up and doing this.
Yep, and I believe I'll be doing a demo. I think a lot of people on this call are familiar with how Velero works, so it'll be introduction to Velero and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Nolan.
Yep, and that's what I've got.
Any questions, comments for Nolan? All right. Next up, Steve.
Yeah, relatively quick update from me this week. I was on community support last week, so did my best to keep up with incoming GitHub issues and Slack stuff. I think that's in a reasonable place. Beyond that, I was working on continuing to do some reviews and testing on the CSI snapshot work. So made it through a little bit more testing there. Filed a couple of issues. I think the core backup and restore flows are looking really good here. I haven't really found any issues with actually backing up and restoring data. So I think there are, obviously still a few issues that we're actively working on, and potentially a few things we can do to improve some of the usability. But in terms of the core flows, it's looking pretty good. And then beyond that, I have a draft PR up, and I was working on some testing for the backup progress issue that we've talked about a few times. So the PR that I have now, does some refactoring in the backup package to split it into kind of two separate parts, one that scrapes the API server for objects, and a separate part that actually processes those objects and writes them into a tarball. And in between, we sort of count how many total items we're going to back up so that we can report progress as we're going. And so right now, that PR is just outputting the progress information to the backup log, which is also visible in the server pod log. So I think this PR, I probably won't add more to this PR, but there will be at least one more PR to also update on backup progress. We talked about doing it in the status of the backup custom resource. So periodically updating some fields there that indicate what number of objects we processed. And then we're also having some discussion on whether we should use Kubernetes events to report information like this. So need to do a little bit more research there, but that'll probably come in a separate PR. I think this one that's in here can more or less stand as it is. So that's pretty much it for me. I'm going to continue with CSI testing probably today and tomorrow.
So this, we talked about this last week and previously as well. I remember there were some issues, of course, getting how big the backup would be and having the process or progress shown there. So I think this showing how many items are being backed up, that's a really smart way of showing progress too.
Yeah, and it's a little bit tricky because when we scrape the API, we get a set number of objects, but then as we actually go to process those objects, we may have plugins that pull in additional related items. So for example, if we're backing up a PVC from a namespace, we don't know until we go to actually run the plugins for that item that we're going to pull in the PV that it uses, which is a cluster scoped resource. So there is some nuance to kind of exactly what the count means that we get in phase 1 and then sort of how we report it in phase 2. But I think what I have here kind of does the best that we can at this point.
Awesome. Any questions, comments for Steve? All right. Moving on to Carlisia.
Yes, not many items from me either. I presented Velero for a Brazilian meetup last week, which was great. And I'm working on the Velero startup behavior. And I have to clean up the description of that ticket because I had misunderstood a couple of the things. Basically, besides the happy path, what we have to deal with is there are no BSLs, then we should crash loop the server. There are BSLs and they're all invalid. We should crash loop the server. And the third case is there are BSLs. One of them is invalid, but it's not the default. The default is invalid. And that's the case where we need to handle and let the user know, well, you could make a backup if you just point to a different BSL to create your backup. So in making the server have a status of waiting. So I think that sums up the change for that ticket. And yeah, I was supposed to update it, but I haven't yet. That's it.
I'll add the link here to the YouTube recording. I watched a bit of that meetup. I thought it was wonderful. I didn't understand a word, but I thought it looked like it went great.
Yeah, it was very friendly, and they were very interested. Some of the attendees already knew Velero.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of being with the community, even when you can't travel or go somewhere. So I think that's a fantastic thing you did.
Yeah, thank you.
Any questions, comments for Coliseum? All right, moving over to Ashish. Can't hear you, Ashish. You're not muted, but we can't hear you. Still nothing. There we go, I think.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So pretty light update from me as well. I was out for a couple of days last week. And I've been doing mostly some of the CSI testing with Steve and fixing some of the bugs we found. And then I'm on community support this week, and then that should kind of take up my whole week. I have a few questions that have not been answered on Slack that came in earlier this morning. So I'm like trying to look at that and figure out what's going on. I don't know if Oliver is on the call here to talk about something he posted in the channel, but I will reach out to him in the channel if he's not in the call right now. I also wanted to share the link to the survey again that we put out like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, maybe. So if folks haven't had a chance to take a look at it, please do. So that's pretty much.
Awesome. And I think we should be able to close out the survey in about a week. Then it's been up for 4 weeks. Does that sound good to you?
Yes, we can talk about it offline.
Yep. Sounds good. And then we can report back with the results. All right. Any questions, comments for Ashish? Okay. Moving on to discussion topics here. Do we have Mark Campbell here today? Doesn't look like it. Do we want to talk about this one anyway?
This one was a carryover from last week. I know he was on the call last week, but I think we ran out of time to cover this. I know he's interested in pursuing this, adding restore hooks to be able to execute custom commands on restore. And he had indicated interest in driving design for this. So I can just reach out on this issue and let him know we'd be happy for him to take the lead on design and see what we can do to help.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I think this is broadly, I think this is something worth having because we have stuff to serialize like databases, but not unpack them and restore them. So at a high level, I'm supportive of this.
I think that sounds great. So Steve, will you reach out to Mark?
Yep, we'll do. I'll comment on the issue.
Excellent, thank you. All right, next up we have Mayank, and I think you are on the phone here. Yes. Did we already talk about this one on Slack?
Yes.
Okay, so no action, no discussion needed here?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Then we'll move over to Nolan.
Yeah, so so this one, Jonas, could you, I think I had a link for this issue up in my status. Yeah, 2383. So if you scroll down some, I just want to give some background for this. So I took some notes, scroll down a little bit more. We had Dan from Crossplane provided he provided a small CRD to start looking at this, and I was taking some notes. So I started with this, and the issues that we saw were we couldn't restore sub-resources because they all had the same status. But if you look at this, there's no sub-resources and their status is blank. So if we scroll down some more, So if I just remove those, it worked. If we scroll down some more, I found that after I applied the Elasticsearch CRD, I got the additional printer columns was moved from the top level spec into the versions, so it was triplicated. And then the next comment, that 21 hours, I found it was actually coming back through the V1 endpoint. So you'll notice that kubectl get raw was going through the V1 beta 1 custom resource definitions endpoint. So what we were doing in 1.3 was 1.3.1, I think 1.3.0, was just changing the version string from V1 to V1 beta 1. That was a very bad idea, and I will take responsibility for doing that. So what I've outlined Dan proposed storing some internal representations. I've also mentioned the 2373, which is Raphael's PR for grabbing all versions of given resources. But back on the community notes, basically the problem right now is for a lot of resources, for a lot of CRDs, we are grabbing them if they're V1 beta 1. If we inspect it and it looks like a V1 beta 1 CRD, right now Velero is just marking it. It's just going in and changing the version string. It's saying, oh, you're V1, but actually you're V1 beta 1, so I'm just changing the string. What we need to do is something more complete. So the two ideas I had yesterday were either if we detect that it is a V1 beta 1 CRD, get it from the V1 beta 1 endpoint. So go and fetch it and get the actual V1 beta 1 version and store that canonically, instead of just rewriting the version string, which would solve this particular problem. The other approach that is more involved was to go with some of Dan's suggestion and use the API server's internal representation of CRDs, which I need to explore this a little bit more. But essentially, there's 3 versions of CRDs in Go code. There's V1 beta 1 custom resource definition. There's the V1 custom resource definition. And then there's this bottom one that's unversioned. It's the API extensions.custom resource definition. This is the one that the API server uses. And there's a whole bunch of conversion functions that are auto-generated that you can, and Dan links to this in the issue. He's got, yeah, and I've got links to it too. Sorry, that comment 20 hours ago. Yeah. Yep, that one. So we've got these auto-generated functions that help us convert back and forth between this internal representation and the versioned representations. My main concern with doing that is Velero, that like completely changes how Velero stores custom resource definitions. If we would store the internal version, it would rely on us doing conversions in and out on backup and restore. So I'm bringing this up now because I don't really want to go down this path until I discuss it with folks, because it has pretty big consequences for what goes into the tarball. The client, the changing client thing is a little bit easier, but I think doing this internal representation might be more correct long term, but I don't know what it means for the backup format yet. So at this point, I think I'd open it up for questions because I don't know if I'm describing it correctly, and just see what people think. Oh, and I guess one more thing, because the CRD issue has been a long-standing thing. What we also really need to do to prevent this from being such a long ongoing thing. I'm proposing once we get this fixed, we need to bump up in priority documenting our regression test scenarios. So I started an issue. I threw this particular issue in as the first regression test scenario. And there is an issue for creating our end-to-end kind tests in GitHub Actions, running those on some kind of schedule, maybe daily or something like that. But to prevent these kinds of ongoing things and catching them earlier, from having these ongoing types of issues, I think we need to do these things and prioritize those for 1.5. And now I'll stop talking.
I have a couple questions, Nolan, and thanks for the overview of that. I guess the first question is in terms of option one that you laid out here, I know right now our backup plugin has some heuristic to try and decide if this is a CRD that was created as V1 beta 1, but that clearly is insufficient. So do we think there is a reliable way to detect whether a CRD was created as V1 beta 1 and cannot be applied as a V1 CRD?
So actually, I think the heuristic is correct. The heuristic's correct. What's incorrect is changing the version string. So if we applied the same heuristic and then instead of changing the version string, just fetched the V1 beta 1 object with the client, I think that would fix it. But
okay.
It wouldn't, but I don't believe it would be a long-term solution, because what happens when V2 comes out or V1.5 or whatever? I think the internal representation is a more long-term solution, but I think the V1 beta 1 client is more correct than this version string, and probably more easily doable in a 1.4 timeframe.
Okay, so the check we have in there would have reliably detected any of these issues that we've reported that are
right,
that can be applied.
Basically, the issue is arising because we changed the version string. It came back from the API server as the preferred version, V1. We changed the version string on it, but the Kubernetes server had already done all the conversions that made it V1 valid, but Velero broke it. Because, using the Elasticsearch example, additional printer columns is not valid. It's not valid to have additional printer columns in the spec at the top level in a V1 CRD. It has to be under the versions. And so when it comes back under the versions, we know that's a V1 CRD. So if it comes back as a V1 beta 1, that's actually incorrect. And so, yeah, the heuristic appears to be applied just fine. It's the fact that the version string is getting changed. And I think the problem was the data set I was using when testing this out. Some CRDs worked just fine, but others didn't. So like for these regression tests that I'm proposing, we would have a much larger data set applying to whatever latest version of Kubernetes is.
Okay. My other question is, do we have a sense of, kind of irrespective of Velero, if there's any guidance in the upstream community? Because, anyone who has created CRDs through V1 beta 1 potentially now has CRD definitions that, while they can be converted through the API server to V1, can't actually be gotten out of the API server and reapplied as V1 CRDs. And at some point, the V1 beta 1 API version is going to go away. So is there guidance upstream on what folks should be doing to be migrating their CRDs, or when V1 Beta 1 is going to go away? I'm just wondering if there's anything useful we can get out of that.
I haven't found that yet. The closest I found is fetch it from the V1 Beta 1 endpoint, which is what that raw command was. And that's very similar to like what Raphael's work does, which may or may not be what our plugin could do. Like that plugin work may overlap with his PR. In terms of when V1 Beta 1 goes away, I don't know. I'll have to find out. In terms of reapplying it, the guidance has been get it from, if you made it V1 Beta 1, get it from that endpoint.
Okay. Yeah, and just quick comment on number 2. I mean, I definitely, we can look at this, whether we want to store the storage versions of API objects, but I agree it's definitely it's a major change to what we're storing in the backup tarball. Like these things are not things that can be applied directly to an API endpoint. So I wouldn't want to go down that path without kind of carefully considering it.
Yeah, kind of going back to my first status update, honestly, I think that might trigger a Velero 2.0, just because it would be a major format update to the file format, because it would then break the expectation that you could just take whatever's in the tarball and directly apply it. That's my suspicion. I don't know that, but that's kind of, I think it's more long-term sustainable, but I also kind of want to deliver this fix in 1.4, and I don't want to hold up 1.4 for figuring out how we handle all that internal stuff.
Nolan, this is Raphael. I have a question. Thanks for explaining that. The problem in question is during the restore, right?
Yes, it's because of what we do during the backup that triggers restore problems.
Yep. Question is, what if, maybe it's gonna take with you offline, but what if we use the PR prototype that take backups of all versions, right? And then during the restore, we manually use that version to see what happens. Then at least if we release the backup of all versions, at least is operationally something that we can provide without the logic of restoring. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, so I can tell you just manually with kubectl apply, grabbing the V1 Beta 1 and reapplying it with kubectl apply works. Okay. Like, so at that level, like that all is good. So, but yeah, I'm wondering that, so I guess that's a third option is we get the backup, get your backup PR merged. Yeah. There's a couple documentation things that I think we need to fix, but otherwise it looks good. And then maybe we look at adding some logic in there to snag the V1 Beta 1 CRDs.
We could, like, if we had both of the versions backed up, we could do something like try applying the V1 version, and if it fails, then try applying the V1 Beta 1 version, which I think would cover this case.
Yeah, and then we could delete those plugins.
Yeah. Definitely add that as a third option to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I wanted to get that backup plugin in this week, but that's a third option for now to get 1.4 out. I think we do need to revisit the handling of CRDs longer term to be more in line with how upstream does it. But yeah, I kind of want to put this whole CRD saga to bed, and then for 1.5 get our testing better, because I don't like leaving our users in this scenario, and getting our end-to-end tests and having better signal around this, and having this seems like a good candidate to start our end-to-end tests, because it doesn't rely on volumes. It's just API objects. So, and that would give us signal, like we can just start throwing CRDs at it. Like people give us CRDs, we can throw things at it. But it sounds like we have 3 options, 2 of which the backup, backing up all versions and then trying the 2 CRDs, the V1 beta 1, the V1, or trying the client, which honestly is duplicating work with the backup. Those 2 seem relatively low effort in terms of getting out for V1.4. At the very least, doing spikes and cheap throwaway code.
All right. Do you want to document the action items, Nolan?
Sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions, comments, concerns before we close this out and move over to Carlisia? All right, Coliseum, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I wanted to see how, I started out trying to see how scaffold would work with Velero, and then I got an offer from Dan Bentley from Tilt to help me set up Velero to use Tilt. I'm like, okay, that works just as well. And so I got it working, and by me, I mean he got it working. And it's a bit tricky because if you have a Docker file on your project, you just point Tilt to that Docker file, and it's pretty simple to set up. But we don't have a Docker file. We build everything with scripts. So it was very gracious of him to take the time to put it together for me. And so I want to show how that works. I need to share my screen.
And Tilt, that's over at tilt.dev. Is that correct?
Yes.
Awesome.
Okay. So let's see. So I start by, I'm just going to copy and paste a bunch of commands. I start by, I'm just going to apply this example here that's going to create a namespace and a deployment with a menu instance. Okay, and now I'm going to deploy it. I want to deploy Velero with Helm. And great. Hang in there. Why is copy and pasting always much slower when you are demoing? Okay, so I'm gonna start again. Deploy menu in the namespace. Install Velero with Helm. I did this morning. Goodness. Is that what it is? And I'm using a kind cluster, by the way.
Carlisia, are the Velero CRDs already installed? Because if they are, you might be okay.
Oh. So I'm sorry.
Well, I think just the error messages seem like they're erroring on in getting the CRDs installed, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, but if the CRDs are already there, then you might be able to just ignore that error.
But it didn't get deployed. Darn it. I swear I ran through this morning. Oh no.
Do you want to delete the CRDs and apply again?
Would this do it? Ah, okay. How do I delete all the CRDs?
You can do K delete CRDs -L component. Yep. Yep.
CRDs, the L-L.
Component equals Velero. Yep. I don't know if you need the version though.
Nope.
Oh, the Helm one probably applied app instead of component.
App equal Velero.
Yep.
It looks like they're all Velero CRDs anyway, so you could just
Nope.
do --all.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. So, wow. Unbelievable. Is it because of the CRGs or okay. I'll just do the let's see if this will work without deploying menu. But then nothing's going to work. I don't know what's going on. Existing resource conflicts. Well, when I run Helm install, the namespace with Helm 3, at least, the namespace is supposed to be there. Okay, I at this point, I'm doing the same things. Should we do this next time?
That sounds good.
Yeah,
next time. No worries.
I ran this morning and it was fine.
It's the demo demons. No worries at all. We can move this to next time. We'll add it to the agenda for next time there.
Okay.
All right. let's move on to the last piece here on the agenda, which is, let me see, the contributor shoutouts. Let me share my screen again here. There we go. Steve, do you want to start?
I'll actually let other folks cover these. I think Nolan, probably the first ones are from Nolan.
Yeah, those two were from me. These were both on the CRD stuff. Dan from Crossplane pointing out the CRD conversions with his CRD toolbox, and Tomas for reporting the issues and providing some test cases. Thanks to you both.
Awesome. And Carlisia, you want to do Helm?
Yeah, so we had a little bit of backlog for the Helm shout out, maybe a couple of weeks of backlog. And starting with Tarek HS, there was addition to quotes for the extra env vars, in that way it supports special characters. And Urinik, he has 4 items. First, he made the Helm chart, our chart Helm 3 compatible, which was great. And he added a PR to allow multiple backup and snapshot providers. Jumping to the last one here, actually, he also added another PR to make it so what would be prioritized would be the configured location provider, not the global default one. And he also added a PR to fix the timeout chart testing parameter in the chart. We had a contribution from Ahmad Hajali to enable specifying a Docker image by digest, in addition to the way we did it originally with the tag. And Lime D for fixing the 2 YAML generation, which got broken by one of the PRs. I'm not naming names, but because also it was my failure to test. And it was great, so that he put that fix in. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Does anyone have anything to add at the end of the call here? Any questions for the team? All right. Then we are done for today. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode here of the Velero community meeting. And have a fantastic rest of your week. Chat with you all on Slack, and see you here next week. Have a good one.
Bye.
Yep.